Chapter 093 Shelter in the Storm. Sometimes he could be so stupid, Zorian lamented. He had known that his simulacrums tended to be more impulsive and whimsical than himself. It seemed to be an intrinsic trait of every one of his copies, no matter how carefully he made them or how closely they were connected to him. They may be very much like him, but they weren't him. The moment they realized they were just a simulacrum that would not live past a few hours or days, their perspective on long-term consequences would get subtly skewed compared to his own. After all, more likely than not it wouldn't be them who would have to deal with those when the time finally came. He also knew that giving his simulacrums unpleasant or boring tasks had a good chance of coming back to bite him in the ass. His simulacrums did not mind dying for him, but they were not at all afraid of inconveniencing him. In fact, they often seemed to relish the idea. Zorian wondered what it said about him that his simulacrums behaved that way, but that was a thought for another time. The point was that, despite knowing all of that, he had still left his simulacrum in charge of dashing Kiriel's hopes of going to Sioria. He should have known that was going to be a problem, but he thought it would be a simple matter of the simulacrum refusing Mother's offer while Kiriel remained quiet on the sidelines. This was, after all, what usually happened when Zorian didn't want to bring Kiriel with him. All the simulacrum had to do was just retread his steps and be on his merry way. Instead his copy got bored and actively sought Kiriel out to hang out with, wasting their precious mana on frivolous entertainment, and then got all emotional when it was time to say goodbye. Ugh. Just like the offending simulacrum predicted, Zorian had been furious. It was a stupid, short-sighted decision. Yes, sending her off to Koth with her parents would be a massive disappointment for her, but at least she'd be out of danger. That was more important than making her momentarily happy. The simulacrum was completely unapologetic about it, too. What's done is done, his copy told him over their telepathic link. I already gave her my word I'm taking her with me. If you have a problem with that, you can come over here and personally inform her that you've changed your mind and won't be taking her with you after all. You bastard. Zorian fumed at him. I should dismiss you for that. That would leave Kiriel and the rest of the family completely defenseless until you sent a replacement, the simulacrum pointed out. Besides, do you really think I care about that? From my very first moment, I knew my time was fleeting. Sadly, true. Since his simulacrums were willing to die and sacrifice themselves for his sake, the thought of dying did not bother them much. Thus, threatening to unmake them was largely ineffective. I just don't understand why you did that, Zorian complained. We could have just taken Kiriel to Sioria in a month or two, once the whole situation has hopefully been resolved and she's back from Koth. There is no need to take her there now, when the situation there is at its most dangerous. When, if not now? The simulacrum disagreed. Even if we can resolve everything and save the city, the consequences are bound to be immense. Even a failed invasion will make our parents perceive Sioria as a place of unspeakable danger. You think they will let her live in the city after that? Even for a few days? Come on. This is probably the last time we can plausibly take Kiriel to Sioria without literally kidnapping her. Zorian frowned. He hadn't really thought of that. It was true that no matter how the situation with the invasion was resolved, it was bound to complicate things. Plus, now that he thought about it a little, Kiriel would have to go back to school at some point soon. It wasn't like she could visit a different city for several weeks at a time, then. Come to think of it, that was probably the reason why she was so excited to make this trip with him now. She knew this was one of her last chances to experience something like this in the near future. He sighed internally. For all of its blessings, he sometimes worried that the time loop had damaged his thinking. For more than a decade, Anything that did not resolve itself within the span of a month was largely irrelevant. He did consider the future a lot, but that was all highly theoretical and often directed at the far future rather than something only a few months later. Still, even with all of that in mind, bringing Kirill to the epicenter of their clash with Red Robe and Silver Lake was simply a terrible idea. Besides, his copy continued, by bringing Kirill along we actually have a legitimate excuse to rent a room at Imaya's place. Kale is much more willing to trust us if we come along with Kirill. And it's not like we don't have a plan to evacuate. Those are just excuses you thought up afterwards to justify your decision, Zorian told him. Well, yes, the simulacrum admitted after a short pause. Yes, I admit that. It's still true, though, and I'm not going to go back on my word. Our word. You promised you're not going to just forget her once we're out there in the real world. Now you want to just stick her on a ship to Koth and put her out of your mind while you do your stuff? That stuff is a matter of life and death, and getting her out of danger doesn't mean I'm going to simply forget about her afterwards. Zorian snapped. I just want her to be safe. She's a prime target, and I'm just a little bit busy at the moment. It's not the time for this. Forget it, his copy sighed. I won't do it, okay? I already said it. What's done is done. I'm not going to turn around and tell her it was all a mistake and that I changed my mind. It would kill her. If you think this is such a huge mistake, come over and do it yourself. Go tell her that her dream trip is cancelled, I dare you. The simulacrum then terminated their connection, signaling it considered the conversation over. After taking several deep breaths and calming down somewhat, Zorian decided that the simulacrum was right about one thing: he should definitely be dealing with this problem personally. As he noted in his earlier lament, it was stupid of him to assign a task like this to a simulacrum to begin with, and only he could truly fix it. Or at least stop the problem from getting worse. Besides, there was no need for him to stay in Seoria at the moment. Previously, he had been worried that his simulacrum would get dispelled in the fighting and that he would need to constantly replace them. But that was far less of a concern, now. The first golem simulacrums had been placed into service by now, replacing two of his ectoplasmic simulacrums with a more multi-efficient and resilient group. Golem simulacrums were very difficult to neutralize. Even punching a hole through the chest or blowing off a limb would not be enough to put them down for good. That extreme resilience, all by itself, should allow his copies to clash with the invaders and Red Robe's simulacrums without fear. Additionally, he couldn't really afford to start anything big while Zack was still incapacitated and vulnerable. Taking some time off to figure out what to do about his family and friends was doable. Thus, not long after his argument with his simulacrum, Zorian found himself back in Suren. He told the simulacrum to make himself scarce for a while and then seamlessly took over his place. Well, mostly seamlessly. Why are you staring at me like that? Kirill asked him suspiciously, narrowing her eyes at him. You aren't thinking on going back on your word, are you? She didn't seem panicked, more outraged at the idea. She placed her hands on her hips and pouted at him in a way that was probably supposed to look angry but looked more like she had an upset stomach or something. No take-backs, she declared, pointing her finger at him. Mom says that's not allowed. You said you're taking me with you, and I'm going. Zorian clacked his tongue interspaced. All he did was stare at her a little, and she immediately started jumping at this one specific conclusion. How judgmental. Never mind that she was essentially correct here. Was his old self so bad that this was a legitimate first conclusion she came up to? Okay, yeah, he could kind of see her reasoning here. I didn't say anything about not taking you, Zorian said slowly. Then what? she asked curiously. "I'm missing some of my school books," Zorian told her. "I'd appreciate it if whoever took them returned them to me before we leave the house." Yeah, I will. I'm sure they'll turn up in your room by the time I finish packing," Kirill fumbled, punctuating her statement with a nervous laugh. She then gave him one final suspicious look before running off upstairs to finish her packing. The simulacrum he had displaced had been watching the whole exchange through his senses. His copy did not comment on his actions in any way, but Zorian could feel the simulacrum's amusement at how things turned out. "Shut up, idiot," Zorian whispered under his breath. "This is all your fault, anyway." He did not need to speak up verbally, of course, but it made him feel slightly better to do so. Why hadn't he dismissed his stupid copy, again? Oh, right. He didn't want to waste mana, and he had a task for him later. In any case, nothing of real note happened until Elsa knocked on their door, just like she always did at the start of the month, and Zorian volunteered to check up on that. Sure enough, he found Elsa waiting for him behind the door. After an appraising glance, she adjusted her glasses and guessed his identity. "Zorian Kaczynski?" she asked. "That's me," Zorian confirmed. "Come in, Miss Zalty." "Oh, you know me?" she asked in mild surprise, stepping into the house. Kind of," Zorian said. "Someone pointed you out to me. You're a teacher from the academy, right?" "That's right," Elsa said. "I didn't know I'm that famous." "Hopefully you heard only nice things about me, yes?" She gave him a small smile, and Zorian awkwardly returned it. She didn't remember anything. That is, of course she didn't remember anything. He and Zack had already done a check of the various temporary loopers to see if any of them made it out in soul form like Zorian. The results were as expected as they were disappointing. They were all alone in this. Nobody else had made it out. It was strange and more than a little painful for Zorian to see Elsa like this. He had worked with her for nearly a year, and she had been one of the people he had been relatively close to. Now that Elsa was dead, the new one had no idea who he was. The same was true for Alanik, Taven, Kale, Xvim, and so many others. They were alive again, but they were not people he had spent all those months working with. He could rebuild these relationships, but without the common goal of escaping the time loop and the limited ability to interact with people outside the group, the nature of those relationships would completely differ. In the meantime, he had to interact with all these people while constantly walking on eggshells because he subconsciously viewed them as friends and allies, and had a year's worth of habits and instincts to reinforce that. While they just viewed him as some stupid teenage kid acting a little weird around them. He'd manage. He totally would. But damn, was this making him depressed. "Mr. Kaczynski? Are you all right?" Elsa asked him, breaking him out of his self-pity. "I'm fine," he assured her. "Just thinking about some things. It's nothing important." He turned the scroll in his hands a few times before casually directing his mana to flow along the sides of the seal, causing it to pop off without resistance. He then glanced at the certificate inside for the sake of appearances and set it aside. "That's pretty impressive," Elsa noted. "Although you held on to the scroll for a while, I could tell you spent most of that time distracted with other thoughts. Once you actually focused on the task of removing the seal, you did it quickly and easily. I see someone is continuing in Damon's footsteps." Once, the comparison to Damon would see him bristling inside at the slight. Now it was just a mildly exasperating statement. He would likely never be totally okay with being compared to his oldest brother like that, but these comparisons no longer had the same sting they once did. "Only in very general terms," Zorian told her. "My brother and I are very different people." "Of course," Elsa smoothly agreed. "Everyone is their own person. I simply meant that you also show signs of great talent." Their discussion proceeded in very predictable fashion. Once she heard he was taking Kirill with him to Sioria, she brought up the possibility of renting a room at Imaya's place, which Zorian accepted. She also informed him that he wouldn't get to choose his mentor like he was supposed to, and that he was simply assigned to Xvimchao instead. Zorian pretended he knew nothing about the man, and Ilsa pretended he was simply a normal, if slightly demanding teacher. He also chose his electives. They were the exact same ones he had chosen the first time he had done all this, except this time the entire process took less than a minute, since he simply told Ilsa his choices the moment she brought the topic up. It was all so routine and familiar that he found himself quickly slipping into a sort of practiced role he had learned to play over the many restarts during which he had done this. It felt comforting and frightening at the same time. Comforting, because this was probably the first time since he had gotten out of the time loop that he felt certain he was making the right choices. Frightening, because he suddenly felt like he was in the time loop all over again. Like everything around him was unreal and illusionary. Unbidden, the notion that he was still trapped in that ever-repeating month popped into his mind and refused to go away. He imagined himself living through this month, winning against his foes, befriending people he knew from the time loop, changing things for the better and getting emotionally invested in it all. Only for the whole thing to turn to smoke in the end when the time loop inevitably reset itself and he woke up in his room in Surin, just like he always did. It was horrifying. It was also stupid. He was definitely out of the time loop. The Arania and the mercenaries that had been knocked out of the time loop by Red Robe were back, and Red Robe himself was again active in the world. The spirit world was also once again accessible. He and Zack had checked that already. All evidence pointed at them being out for real. But the fear remained. Ilsa had finished her explanations and left, but Zorian's mind remained trapped in this ominous scenario for quite a while afterwards. Sometimes he could be so stupid, Zorian lamented. Break. The long train ride from Surin to Sioria was even more boring than it usually was. This was mostly because Zorian was not doing anything of critical importance, and thus had to refrain from tapping into his mana reserves too much. That mana was best reserved for his simulacrums, who were out there acquiring funds, making magic items, teleporting around, and fighting their enemies. Frivolous uses of magic like entertaining Kirill on the train with illusions were simply inexcusable. He had scolded his simulacrums over these sorts of things many times in the past, so now that he was in their position it was important that he set an example for them and show them how things should be done. Additionally, this was no longer the time loop, and he would have to deal with consequences that went beyond just this 1 month. It was best for him to at least pretend to be a normal student mage in front of a little tattletale like Kirill. That meant no spellcasting at all for the moment, since students could not bypass the wards on the train. After an hour or so, he kind of began to understand why his simulacrums were so prone to breaking the no frivolous magics rule. Still, in the end he found ways to amuse himself and Kirill without magic. He told her stories of some of his time-looping adventures, using true stories with altered names and a few tweaks here and there. Kirill complained the stories were too fantastical and ridiculous after a while, so they started a drawing competition instead. Zorian had actually learned how to draw reasonably well over the long course of the time loop, but he was nowhere near good enough to match Kirill, so she always won. His sister did not mind, though. Even though it was an unfair competition right from the start, she always wanted to keep going for another round. The little imp never got tired of winning. "Now stopping in Corsa," a disembodied voice echoed. A crackling sound again. "I repeat, now stopping in Corsa." "Thank you." A few things happened in quick succession then. First, Ibri wandered in and peeked into the compartment to see if it was free. Zorian, being kind of bored with Kiril's antics, invited her in. Ibri seemed a little taken aback by his friendliness, but seeing Kiril put her at ease, and she did claim a seat beside them after a moment of hesitation. Then Byrne, a guy he had met way back at the beginning of his time-looping experience, also wandered in and asked if a seat was free in their compartment. Zorian happily invited him in, too. Suddenly, the compartment had become a lot livelier than it used to be. Ibri was shy and quiet, and had immediately chosen to bury her nose in a book when she came in, but Byrne was friendly and talkative and immediately tried to strike up a conversation with them. Kiril immediately started peppering him with questions about magic and the academy. "I'm Kiril Kaczynski," Kiril said, "and that's my brother Zorian. Are you a student like Zorian? Can you do magic? What year are you? Is it true that you have to fight a giant spider in order to get admitted as a student?" Zorian says it's a requirement, but I think he's lying. "Ha ha, I don't think I would have gotten in, if that were the case," Byrne laughed. "I don't think I could win a fight against the other students, never mind a giant spider." "Lots of types of giant spiders," Zorian noted. "There's a whole bunch of them that you could easily club to death with a mundane weapon, so long as you keep your cool and don't panic." "Oh. You sound pretty knowledgeable about that. Did you ever fight one for real?" Byrne asked curiously. "Yes, though not as an admission test, of course," Zorian said. "I told that to Kiril just to mess with her a little." "I knew it," Kiril pouted, folding her hands over her chest and giving him a grumpy look. "Ah, so, I hate to shift the subject, but that last name." Byrne tried. "Yes, Damon Kaczynski is our brother," Zorian said with a shrug. "We have very little contact with him, though. He mostly does his own thing and rarely visits." The conversation continued for a while after that, meandering from topic to topic. Even Ibri joined in after figuring out from Byrne's question that they were Fortov siblings. She did not actually bring up Fortov, however, which was probably for the best. Zorian would have been diplomatic, of course, but Kiril disliked their middle brother as much as he did and would likely not have anything nice to say about that topic. In any case, the conversation eventually turned towards a particularly shocking event that occurred in Seoria recently. Namely, the fact that Zack's place had gotten utterly trashed during his fight with Red Robe, and that he himself had gone missing for several hours while people frantically searched for him all over the city. What? Someone actually attacked the Nevada mansion like that? I didn't know that, Ibri said, surprised. Yes, it happened really recently. The attack happened very early in the morning, just a few hours ago, Byrne said, nodding self-indulgently. He was clearly pleased to have acquired this news so soon after it occurred. Man, news sure does spread fast these days. I hear the fighting was really fierce. Some of the support columns were damaged, and several walls got breached. I heard repairs will take weeks. It must have been a really powerful force that launched the attack. The newspapers were saying only a fully equipped regiment could have done so much damage so quickly. But that place is right there in one of the better parts of the city. And aren't Nevada an old, influential noble house? Ibri asked. How could a force of that size come and go just like that? Where were the guards during all this? Well, someone was clearly fighting the attackers and fought them off in the end, so presumably the guards were not useless, Byrne shrugged. Besides, I hear the Nevada are not the same force they once were. My father says they are a mere shadow of their former selves. It's still crazy that something like this can happen. You know, Zack Nevada is one of my classmates, Zorian said suddenly. Really? Byrne said, perking up. I don't suppose you heard more about this, then? "I just know Zack is fine," Zorian said, shaking his head. He wasn't present in the mansion when the attack occurred. He was out drinking and dancing throughout the entire night. Or at least that was the excuse Zack had picked for himself as an explanation as to what had happened. They modified the memory of the healer that had patched him up after leaving him a sizable anonymous tip for his services, so no one should be able to contradict his story. Zorian did suggest to Zack that he should pick some other excuse, since saying he had spent the entire night getting drunk and gods know what else was somewhat embarrassing, but Zack insisted this was fine. Sure enough, Ibri responded to Zorian's explanation by wrinkling her nose in distaste, while Burn simply laughed awkwardly. "I did hear rumors about the Nevada heir," Ibri said. "They say he is not exactly a model student, if you know what I mean." "There is nothing wrong with his magic skills," Zorian quickly said, feeling compelled to defend his friend. "He's just a little reckless." "Are you friends with this Zack?" Kirill asked curiously. "How come I don't know anything about this? Why would I say something like this to a little tattletale like you?" Zorian asked rhetorically. "You'd run off to tell Mother the moment my back was turned." "I would not," she huffed, swinging her legs in an attempt to hit his knees. He shifted his legs out of the way a few times and she eventually gave up on the idea. By the time the train arrived in Seoria, the whole group was so absorbed in their conversation that they kept together and continued conversing even when it was time to disembark. When the train began to approach Seoria, the whole group left the compartment and went to stand by the exit, along with so many others. Usually Zorian led Kirill with him to the exit early enough to seize a place right next to the exit, but he had lost track of time this time, and they ended up in the middle of a literal throng. Somewhat tired from socializing and put off by the throng of people pushing and shoving all around him, Zorian leaned on the nearby window and simply observed the people around them. It had been a while since he had been stuck in a crowd like this. With his great magical skills and ability to simply teleport from place to place, he usually had no need to use normal transportation methods to get to places. A confusing, erratic mess of emotions and mental signals washed against his mind's sense, but he was far too good at controlling his psychic powers these days to be bothered by that. His mind was like a rock in the sea, battered by the winds and violent waves, but solid and unmoving. "Hey, you. You're one of the upperclassmen, aren't you?" Zorian looked at the girl talking to him, curious as to what she wanted from him. She was part of the group of first years next to him, and had completely ignored him up until now. Her whole group was kind of amusing, talking excitedly amongst themselves about how they were going to start learning magic, and become famous mages, and similar stuff. He kind of wished he could see their faces when they realized the first year was all about theory and repetitive mana exercises. "I am," he confirmed. "So? Can you show us any magic?" she asked eagerly. "Wait. This sounded kind of familiar." "He can't." Kirill, who had apparently been listening in on their conversation, piped in. "The train has a magic field that stops people from doing magic. It's because some of the students would set fire to the seats or etch their names and crude drawings into the walls of the train," Zorian confirmed. "Oh," the girl said, clearly disappointed. "I know," Kirill agreed with, sadly. "It sucks. Some jerk always has to ruin it for the rest of us." Yeah, this whole situation was really familiar to him for some reason. Oh well, it probably wasn't anything important. Break. Zorian became a little concerned about things after the group disembarked at Seoria's main train station. This was because Bryn had a habit of following after them, and Zorian had plans that would be rather inconvenienced by that. He was just debating whether it was justified to use mind magic to nudge his thoughts in the right direction, when Bryn regretfully informed them that he had to stay behind at the station for a while. Apparently his parents were disturbed enough by the recent attack on the Nevada mansion that they had asked a friend of theirs that lived in the city to pick Bryn up from the station and escort him to his dorm. Thus, Bryn would have to stay behind and wait for the man to show up. Zorian found it curious that Red Robe's attack on Zack had such far-reaching consequences. Bryn wasn't even from Seoria, yet the attack changed the way he went through the months so quickly and radically. Zack and Zorian knew that Tizen and the city authorities would have a strong reaction to the Nevada mansion being suddenly attacked like that, but he didn't expect the ordinary people to care so much. In any case, Zorian simply said goodbye to Bryn and Iberi and was on his merry way with Kirill in tow. He did exchange contact methods with Bryn and Iberi in case they wanted to get in touch later, but he wasn't sure if anything would come out of that. Neither of them had been particularly inclined to seek him out when they had done similar things in the time loop. With the world lasting longer than a month, though, perhaps that would change. Only time would tell. Zorian didn't take Kirill immediately towards Imayu's place, though. Instead, he took her to a familiar bridge in one of the city parks. There, a small black-haired girl was crying her eyes out over a bicycle that had fallen into the creek below. Kirill watched quietly from the sidelines as Zorian slowly calmed Nachka down and got her to explain why she was crying. This done, he placed his hand over the bridge and telekinetically lifted the bike out of the water. He also casually cleaned it up a little, ignoring the chorus of complaints from his simulacrums that he was being frivolous in his mana use. The jerks had been on the lookout for something like this for a while now, most likely. It isn't frivolous, he told them telepathically. What did you expect me to do, exactly? You could have waded in through the muddy water on foot, a simulacrum helpfully explained. It's just getting a little wet, there's no harm in that. Another one added. All it would take is a bit more time. Gods, why are you so impatient? A third one scolded. All of you, shut up and mind your own business. Zorian told them grumpily. He had the worst simulacrums. There, Zorian told Nachka. Your bike is clean, intact, and out of the creek. You can stop crying now, okay? Okay, she sniffed, rubbing her eyes. Thank you. Well, if that's that, I guess we should get going now, Zorian said. Though. I think it's going to rain soon. Do you have an umbrella? And no. She said, shaking her head. But, I'm going to be fine. We should help her get home, Kirill suddenly said. She quickly got into Nachka's personal space and introduced herself. Hi, I'm Kirill. Kirill Kaczynski, and that's my brother Zorian. What's your name? After some back and forth, Nachka agreed to have them accompany her home. The walk was a short one, but Zorian paid close attention to everything around him along the way. He found no evidence of cephalic rats or other invader agents along the way. Even the cephalic rat swarm he usually encountered while traveling through this part of the city was not here this time. He had chosen the path that led to Nachka on purpose, not because he was trying to avoid the rats. The Arania were fighting a pretty intense war with the cephalic rats at the moment, so this turn of events wasn't particularly surprising. They were too busy to spy on people much, and could no longer move freely through most of the city. Still, while Ria and her family seemed free of invader schemes at the moment, he knew that wouldn't last forever. Assuming Red Robe did not find some kind of alternative method of unlocking Panaxith's prison, shifter children like Nachka remained a critical component of Primordial's release plans. Thus, evacuating them out of the city through means fair or foul was probably the most certain way of sabotaging the ritual at Zack and Zorian's disposal. Shifters were not that numerous, and there were only so many shifters available in the area. Though, if he were going to be honest with himself, wanting to befriend Ria and her family wasn't purely because of pragmatism. Ree had no special influence over her fellow shifters and would be of limited help if he wanted to talk them into going along with the evacuation. He just had a soft spot for a little girl that had befriended his little sister, and the sight of her stripped naked and waiting to be drained of all blood for some messed-up blood ritual was vividly burned into his mind. He had promised to himself that he would make sure Nachka survived the month out there in the real world, and he still meant that. He meant to save all the shifter children, of course, but making sure Nachka was safe had a personal dimension for him. Since he had already thrown away his good sense and taken Kirill to the death trap that was Sioria, he may as well introduce her to her former and future friend. At least if they started hanging around each other, he could more easily protect the both of them without spreading himself thin. The actual conversation with Ree was pretty mundane. Nachka's mother was pretty friendly, and Zorian did not confront her with any heavy topics. They simply talked about who he and Kirill were, how they had met Nachka, and where they were staying. Kirill almost ratted out Nachka on dropping her bike in the stream, which caused the little cat shifter to panic and hurriedly shut her up by manifesting her claws and clamping down on Kirill's arm. This caused Ree to freak out because Nachka almost ruined their secret and hurt a guest, but the situation was thankfully resolved in the end, and Zorian pretended not to have noticed anything strange about the incident. Interestingly, Ree also brought up the news of Zach's place being attacked, just like Bryn did. She didn't have any new information for Zorian, but it did emphasize how notable the attack was for people. Zorian wondered if Red Robe even realized how eye-catching the whole thing would end up being. "You were classmates with the Nevada heir?" Ree asked. I seem to have met an important person today." "Not really?" Zorian said dubiously. "Come now, Mr. Kaczynski. You have a famous brother, you attend a prestigious magical academy, and one of your classmates is a scion of a noble house," Ree pointed out. "Two, actually," said Zorian. "There was also Tanami. I don't think any of that makes me important." Ree hummed loudly at him, clearly not agreeing. "Have it your way," she shrugged. She rose from her seat and took a look at the weather outside. Things didn't look good, of course. The rain was pouring in thick sheets while the wind was blowing madly in all directions, and Zorian knew from the time loop that the storm wouldn't be ending anytime soon. This was the main reason Zorian was less impatient about leaving Ree's place this time around. He couldn't just teleport to Imaya's place or create a rain shield around himself and Kirill. No, he would have to use an umbrella like a normal person, and they would end up wet and miserable by the time they actually reached their destination. He was in no hurry to experience that. "What horrid weather," Ree said, frowning. "I think you're going to have to remain here over the night." "We can't impose on you like that," Zorian said hurriedly, shaking his head. "We'll just slowly make our way through the storm. A little rain won't kill us." "You can't be serious," Ree said, giving him an annoyed look. "I know teenage boys can be a little reckless, and I would not have said anything if it was just you being stupid. But you're taking your little sister along and you have to take this into account. Are you seriously thinking of taking her out there into that with just an umbrella?" Zorian stared at Ree for a few seconds before looking at Kirill, who was sitting on the floor with Nachka. They were both whispering something to each other and pretending they weren't listening in on their conversation. "Kirill," Zorian asked her slowly, "what do you think about going?" She fumbled, rubbing her hands awkwardly. "It's raining pretty hard." Zorian sighed, taking off his glasses and massaging the bridge of his nose. After a few seconds he gave Ree an embarrassed look. He was just about to speak up, but she put a hand on his shoulder to stop him and simply nodded her head knowingly. "I'll go get some blankets," she said, before wandering off to do just that. In the corner of his eye, he could see Nachka and Kirill excitedly whisper to each other. They, at least, seemed pleased with this outcome. After a few seconds, Zorian clacked his tongue and decided to just roll with the situation. It was embarrassing, but there was no real harm in it. He looked through the window, silently observing the storm for a while. After a while, Ri wandered in and placed a steaming cup of tea on the windowsill beside him. Zorian gave her a curious look. "A cup of tea is necessary for proper rain watching," Ri explained to him. "Ah. Thank you," Zorian said quietly. "Sorry for the imposition. I could tell it was going to rain, but, do I look that mean and selfish to you?" Ri asked, raising her eyebrow at him. "Hospitality had always been important to my people." "Your people?" Zorian asked her curiously, feigning ignorance. "Your acting skills are decent, but I know you saw the claws on Nachka's fingers." "You probably know what we are," Ri said, sipping slowly from her own cup of tea while standing beside him. "Yeah," Zorian admitted with a shrug. "It doesn't bother me." "Good," Ri said simply. She then dropped the subject and no longer pursued the matter. "I don't know if this is really the issue, or if there is something deeper going on, but it's pointless to get angry or frustrated at a storm. It's a force of nature. There is no fighting that. You just take shelter and wait until it ends." "Right," said Zorian quietly, taking a sip of the tea Ri had made for him. Sadly, some storms couldn't be dodged that easily. Break. While Zorian had been escorting Kirill, his simulacrums had been very busy. They, along with Zack's simulacrums, constantly attacked known cult leaders and invader bases, raiding them for funds and trying to decapitate their organizations. Sadly, this hadn't been nearly as effective as they had hoped. Red Robe had clearly been very busy and most of their targets had been forewarned they were coming. Warding schemes were changed, the guards were on alert, and some people were just outright evacuated to safety. They had managed to acquire a lot of money and resources, since many of the secret caches had been protected mainly by their secrecy, and it wasn't easy to strip a base of everything that was worth money in a hurry. But Zorian doubted they had managed to deal any kind of decisive strike to their enemies. Below the city, the fighting was also intense. It was mostly the Arania fighting the cephalic rats, but Zorian's simulacrum sometimes helped the Iranian side. And since Zorian's uncontested presence would have meant a decisive victory for the Arania, Red Robe's simulacrum was always there to stop the cephalic rats from getting wiped out. Neither Zorian nor Red Robe were fighting seriously, wary of showing the enemy too much and wasting their mana reserves, but the fact Zorian's simulacrum had a much more resilient golem body meant that he was slowly getting an upper hand in these skirmishes. It remained to be seen what Red Robe would do in response to that. Zorian doubted he would let the cephalic rats just die, since they were a critical asset for the invasion forces. The simulacrums were also negotiating with various Iranian webs in the region, trying to bring in additional support for the fight. Of particular importance were the negotiations with the Silent Doorway Adepts, since they needed their help to open a connection to Koth. Zorian did not doubt for a second the negotiations were going to succeed. They had lots of things they could tempt the Silent Doorway Adepts with. The Bakura Gate addresses in particular were bound to have a irresistible allure for the web. However, the issue was that these negotiations would still end up taking time, and they had to keep the web protected from enemy machinations while they were in progress. Silver Lake knew exactly how important this was to them, so an attack at the Silent Doorway Adepts was worryingly plausible. Some things were also moved forward a little. Kill and his daughter had been contacted by Zack's simulacrum disguised as a school official, who teleported them directly to Imaya's place. This was mostly because Zack and Zorian were worried that Silver Lake, whose movements were still a mystery to them, was going to target them. Kill and his daughter were too easy of a target to be left alone for long. Thankfully, Kale did not suspect a thing and even praised the Academy for their thoughtfulness. Zorian intended to evacuate Kale to Koth once he opened the gate linked there, but for now he was safest at Imaya's house, since that way he would be living under the same roof as Zorian and Kirill. Meanwhile, the simulacrum that got Zorian in the whole trouble with Kirill got a task to get his parents away from the house as soon as possible. Thus, less than an hour after Zorian and Kirill had boarded the train to Sioria, the simulacrum rounded up mother and father and teleported them to the port city of Luya. Their memory was modified to make them believe this was perfectly normal. It would create some discrepancies in dates. That could be a problem later. For now, though, Zorian was just glad they would soon be out in the open ocean and out of danger. He'd deal with potential consequences of his decision later. The simulacrum in his room that was focusing on stabilizing his mana reserves was also evacuated out of the house, leaving it completely empty. Even if Red Robe decided to visit the place now, the most he could do was burn it down in frustration. Which would still be devastating for mother and father, but Zorian was quite sure they wouldn't want to die to protect it. Overall, things had been going decently. There was still no sign of Silver Lake, and Red Robe was passively responding to their moves while focusing most of his energies into something they couldn't see. It made no sense to Zorian. The way he saw it, he and Zack had an absolute advantage in this conflict. Even if everything else failed, they could always inform the Eldemarian government about the invasion, and it would be instant loss for Red Robe and Silver Lake. Any chance of successfully invading the city or freeing Panaxith would be gone. No matter how personally powerful they were or what clever plans they had, they could never take on the central government head on and win. Thus, Red Robe and Silver Lake should have taken a far more aggressive stance against them by now. But there was nothing Zorian could do about that. All he and Zack could do was wait. Hopefully, by the time they recovered their full strength, they would uncover what their enemies were planning. Chapter 094 Ghosts. The next morning, Zorian and Kirill bid Ria and her family goodbye and went to Imaya's place. Once there, they found out that Imaya had only been slightly worried for them. She had guessed from the severity of the last night's storm that they had taken shelter somewhere overnight. He also officially met Kale and his daughter. The Morlock boy was a bit more leery about him than Zorian remembered, but he supposed that was to be expected. He usually greeted Kale at Sioria's train station and charmed him with practiced gestures and conversation right from the start. None of which had happened this time. Since the circumstances of their meeting differed, so did Kale's reaction to him. It was a minor matter, really. Zorian was confident that the Morlock boy would warm up to him eventually. If anything, the fact Kale was currently so distant may very well be a good thing. Much like Zorian's interaction with Ilsa earlier in the Resta. He froze suddenly, fiercely knocking his head with his fist a couple of times. No. Not restart. There was no time loop anymore. It was the real thing. He had to get this into his head as soon as possible. His strange actions prompted strange looks from Imaya, who asked him if he was all right. Once Kirill had settled in and he cleared up some things with Imaya, Zorian left a simulacrum to guard the place and left to find Zack. He eventually found him sitting on the edge of the Academy fountain, idly running his hand through the water while lost in thought. "It's weird," Zack told him when he approached. The fountain hadn't worked for years, and it was only recently that it got fixed and repainted. But to me, it looks perfectly normal as it is right now. In fact, I don't think I actually remember what the fountain looked like before this month. Makes sense, Zorian shrugged. It's been decades since you've last seen it. Even Zorian struggled to remember details like that, and his stay in the time loop had been far shorter than Zack's. He had the ability to flawlessly preserve important memories inside his memory packets, Of course, but that only worked for select things he consciously deemed important. Most of his memories went through the exact same process as any other person's. Zack didn't say anything to that. Instead he simply got up from his sitting spot and then motioned for Zorian to follow him. "I'm a bit hungry," Zack said. "Let's go to the cafeteria and see what they have to offer. It's been so long since I've been there I've already forgotten what the food there tastes like." "So did I," Zorian admitted. "Still, we stopped going there for a reason. The cafeteria food is nothing special, I assure you of that." "What's this all about, really?" "I don't know. It's just something that has been on my mind lately," Zack said with a shrug. "Say, did you ever figure out what you would do after this month?" Zorian hesitated for a few seconds. "There are so many uncertainties surrounding this month that it almost seems foolish to have any long-term plans until it's over," he said cautiously. "Even if we both survive and Sioria isn't a ruined wreck by the end of it, the invasion may very well leave us on the run or trigger another round of Splinter Wars. Ignoring that, though, I think I'll just gather some funds." Zack gave him a knowing look. "Well, okay, a lot of funds," Zorian admitted. "And then I'll open a research facility to study the nature of mana. Maybe I'll be able to figure out how to duplicate that mana-increasing stabilization frame that you and Quatachachul have attached to your soul. Or maybe I'll discover how to store mana in outside containers, assimilate mana more quickly and efficiently, or some other revolutionary improvement. That had kind of been my dream when I was younger, to invent something that would completely revolutionize the way magic is done. I eventually discarded it as a childish fantasy that I had no power to realize. But maybe it's not so impossible anymore." "Still very difficult," Zack noted. "If a talented mage with plenty of money was enough to revolutionize magic, it would happen way more often than it does." "It doesn't matter," Zorian said. "It's fine if I fail. I have no interest in hoarding money or in political maneuvering. So what else would I do with my time and money?" "Never say never," said Zack with a grin. "Once you get married, you may find your wife is not nearly as divorced from material concerns as you are. You're not even married yourself, so how would you know anything about that?" Zorian huffed. "Don't talk like an old man." "But I am an old man," Zack protested. "At least from a certain perspective. Anyway, I hope you realize that the sort of thing you're describing is something the TimeLoop would have been absolutely perfect for, right?" "Yes, but I didn't have time to focus on such peripheral, highly theoretical projects back in the TimeLoop." "Kind of funny, but true. Life is amusing like that sometimes," Zorian shrugged. He paused for a moment, thinking about something. "Of course, before I can throw myself into big projects like that, I first need to pay back all the people that helped me inside the TimeLoop. Doing that without drawing any attention and revealing my identity is bound to be a tricky undertaking." "Can you even do that at this point?" Zack asked. "We lost most of the notebooks and research notes when the physical exit strategy failed. I saved the most crucial work in my head, and the rest can be reconstructed with some effort," Zorian said. "It may take years but I'm sure I can do it." He was deliberately being a little more optimistic about things than he really felt. So many things had been lost at the end of the TimeLoop. It pained Zorian to even think of it. Zorian had used memory packets to preserve their most important information, designs, and notebooks before the group had made their exit attempt. Just in case. But this was still just a small part of the whole. It couldn't substitute for the vast body of knowledge and invention that the group had managed to gather in the end. Rebuilding that massive library and then handing down portions of it to various people without causing a massive stir that led straight back to him would be a difficult problem. "Does that mean you've already given Kale his notes?" Zack asked curiously. "No, not yet," said Zorian, shaking his head. He actually had fairly complete version of Kale's notes. He prioritized preserving his research, mostly due to them being old friends, so he didn't have to reconstruct much in that regard. The situation is very weird right now. I don't want to involve him in this mess until I have to, and I can't just hand him those research notes and leave him to his own devices. Do you even want to tell him about the time loop? Zack asked. Ideally, I'd like to keep everyone except Xvim, Alanik, and the Seorient Web in the dark about the time loop, Zorian said. I'm not sure how possible that is, though. We are already planning to evacuate everyone we know to Koth at some point. We're going to need an explanation of some sort for that. At the very least, informing Dayman about things may be necessary to get his cooperation. Dayman would also be useful for his magical prowess and possibly his connections, Zack pointed out. Speaking of Koth, how are the negotiations with the Silent Doorway Adepts going? Reasonably well, Zorian said. We haven't reached an agreement, but that's normal. I don't think we need to tell them anything about time travel. Gate keys for another continent are tempting enough on their own. We should have a way to Koth in a few days. Good. I'll feel a lot better with Princess by my side, Zack said. With her support, not even Quatachichul can force us to withdraw. I'd put my hand in the fire that Red Robe is trying to broker some kind of alliance with Quatachichul as quickly as he can. Probably, Zorian agreed. I really don't like this, Zack said. You at least are in constant contact with your simulacrums, but I don't have that luxury. I have no idea what's happening out there until my simulacrums deign to send me a report, so all I can do is wait. I feel useless and stupid. The simulacrums are doing fine, Zorian assured him. I'm concerned that we can't find any solid clues as to what Red Robe is really doing, but us being active along with our simulacrums would not have helped with that anyway. You may be right, but I'm sick of waiting, Zack told him. It just isn't my style, you know? Once we get our hands on the Imperial Orb and have Princess on our side, we'll be able to really go on the offensive. It doesn't matter what Red Robe is planning then, we'll just come straight at him and crush him in battle. If we demolish the Evason base beneath Seoria and shut down the gate they use to transport their troops, the invasion is over. We'll see if he'll still hide behind simulacrums when it happens. Hey! Zorian! Hey! Over here! They had barely stepped foot inside the cafeteria when a familiar voice started calling for him. It was Benisek, the chubby, cheerful, girl-obsessed boy that Zorian used to regularly interact with. Sadly, the time loop had not been kind to their friendship. Benisek could be really annoying and shallow, and the time loop had only made that worse. Eventually, Zorian stopped interacting with him at all. He kind of felt bad about that. Benisek had his faults, but so did his old self. He couldn't really ignore the boy's invitation without looking like a colossal jerk, so he reluctantly walked over. Zack followed after him, inviting himself along. "Hello, Ben," Zorian said, as he fetched a nearby chair and sat down next to him. Zack gave Ben a friendly wave and a smile before copying his action. "You sound happy. Eager to start a new school year." "You bet," Benisek said, grinning wildly. "We're upperclassmen now. Our dating prospects have entered a whole new level." "Hell yeah," Zack agreed, fist pumping in the air. "For girls." "For girls," Benisek agreed, returning the fist pump with one of his own. "For God's sake, you two." "We're in a public setting," Zorian complained, trying to ignore the way people around them were staring at them. "So, you two are hanging out together, now?" Benisek asked curiously. "When did that happen?" "In the last couple of days," Zorian told him. "Don't ask." It's a long story involving a series of misunderstandings, me getting punched in the face at the train station, and Zack getting attacked by my little sister in retaliation. That sounds super interesting, though, he protested. You can't tell me something like that and then just leave me hanging, man. He suddenly frowned a little, giving Zorian a weird look. Wait. Are you saying you brought your annoying little sister along to Syria? He asked. Yup, Zorian confirmed with a decisive nod. Ouch, Benisek said with an exaggerated wince. My condolences. See, I told you that being so serious and responsible would eventually bite you in the ass. My family would never even think of letting me take care of my younger sisters. You should be more like me, Zorian. The mere idea is horrifying, Zorian told him bluntly. Bah, you don't know what's good for you, Benisek said. He gave Zack a speculative look. Though, if you keep hanging out with our dear friend Zack, that may change after a while. I hear your recent life has been somewhat exciting. Oh yeah, downright explosive, agreed Zack. So that attack I was hearing about? Benisek asked. It's all true, but I was out drinking and dancing that night, so it ended up missing me, Zack said with a careless shrug. Ha ha, now that's the proper way to evade death. Benisek said, leaning forward to punch Zack in the shoulder. Zack blocked it, which Benisek took in stride. He leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more solemn all of a sudden. But man, I got to say, this is one messed up week. First the attack on Aveda Mansion, and now that thing with the villages in Holliker. What is the world coming to? I really hope this isn't a prelude to war, you know? It's kind of selfish, but I want my academy days to be peaceful and fun. Zack and Zorian shared a confused look with each other. What do you mean villages in Holliker? Zorian asked him. We don't know anything about that. Ah. No? Benisek said, surprised. You two need to pay more attention to recent events, then. I know Eldemarian newspapers haven't reported much on it, but you two should keep an eye on continental news. One of you is the heir of a noble house and the other. Well, I know Zorian doesn't like hearing about his brother, but, just tell us already, Zorian told his friend with a heavy sigh. Fine, but you have to tell me that long story you teased me with earlier, Benisek blackmailed. Deal, Zorian immediately agreed. He would make something up later. Alright, Benisek grinned. I'll hold you to that. Anyway, word is going around that a number of villages in Holliker, that's the big neighboring country to the west of Eldemar, you know, have been hit by some sort of attack recently. A weirdly brutal attack. Rumors are saying it was a total bloodbath, with hundreds of people killed. Zorian's mood immediately plummeted. He supposed they finally got a clue as to what Red Robe had been doing all this time. Later the day, Zorian returned to Amaya's place, his thoughts still on what Benisek had told them. He and Zack had immediately dispatched a pair of simulacrums to Holliker to check up on this situation, but it would take a while for them to reach the villages in question and investigate things. In the meantime, they could only speculate what Red Robe had been doing there and for what purpose. He didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to his musings, though, because he was soon interrupted by Taven, who sought him out for recruitment. Zorian didn't want to tell her about the time loop. Like Kale and a lot of other people that once made up their group of temporary loopers, she couldn't actually help them in any way, and telling her about the invasion would just expose her to danger. Well, more danger than she was already in. Sometimes he wondered if it wouldn't be easier to just tell everyone about the time loop and point the central government at Red Robe and the invaders right from the very start. However, when they had discussed that scenario back in the time loop, even the temporary loopers agreed this was a very unhappy solution to the problem. The central government was notoriously corrupt and power-hungry, and the current king favored a highly aggressive stance towards any internal threats. Once Eldamar's forces were done dealing with Red Robe and the Ebusons, they were almost certainly going to turn on them. And anyone who knew about the time loop and the invasion would likely suffer along with them. Calling in the military was pretty much a guaranteed win for Ceoria and its citizens. However, they, and people close to them, might end up paying the price for this good deed. This was not a choice they wanted to make. They were not selfless angels, after all. Thus, it was decided to only make the report once they were reasonably sure it couldn't be tracked down to them. That would take a while to set up, but it wouldn't take the entire month to do so. That was the main reason why Zorian was fine with Red Robe's stalling for time. Unless Red Robe blindsided them with something, Zack and Zorian were guaranteed to win. Of course, if Red Robe's schemes did blindside them, they would rather unmask themselves than allow the city to be destroyed and watch as an ancient godlike monster is released into the world. That was why it was important to keep most of the former temporary loopers in the dark for now. If the army suddenly stormed into the city and started asking questions, the less they knew about what was going on, the better. Still, he couldn't just refuse Taven's offer and send her off into the tunnels beneath the city to die. Thus, he let her in on some of his secrets. "What?" Taven complained. "Why are you staring at me like that? Is there something on my face?" She ran her hand over her face to check things and even glanced behind her to check if there was someone standing over her shoulder. Zorian didn't know whether she was faking it in order to make fun of him or if she honestly believed these were legitimate possibilities. But he supposed he had been staring at her for a little too long. "Taven, this job of yours is a total setup," he eventually told her. "You should stay away from this one." "Huh? What do you mean?" she asked, narrowing her eyes at him. "It's just a simple find and retrieve in the tunnels below the city. Fight some giant spiders, find the lost thingy, get out." "The giant spiders are Aranya," Zorian told her. "They are giant, intelligent, telepathic spiders. Unless you know what you're doing and come prepared, they can blast you into unconsciousness before you can blink." Taven took a step back at the description, her eyes widening at the description. "Shit," she swore. "Roach, how do you—" "And that man isn't some innocent wanderer that lost his expensive trinket down there," Zorian continued. "He had been spying on the area and got caught in the act. That wardbreaker device is currently safely stored in the Aranya treasury, not carelessly dropped in some dusty tunnel and free for the taking." "Roach, how do you know this?" Taven asked, a little more forcefully this time. "Huh? I'm surprised you didn't just accuse me of lying," he told her slowly. "This is too serious," she said, frowning. "I don't think you'd joke around with something like that. And you're not really the joking type, either. Now tell." "Well, I know about this because I'm friendly with the Aranya," Zorian told her. "They are teaching me how to control my telepathic powers, after all." "Your telepathic powers?" she repeated slowly. "As in mind reading?" "Among other things, yes," he sent her telepathically. She flinched back and gave him a frightened look afterward. For a moment Zorian thought she would bolt out of his room right then and there, but instead she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and forcibly calmed herself down. "Damn, Roach," she said, massaging her forehead. "You really know how to drop a secret on someone. I had to make sure you take this seriously," Zorian said. "Well, you succeeded," she responded unhappily. She gave him a suspicious look. "You didn't read my mind without permission, did you? How long has this been going on, anyway?" "I didn't," Zorian assured her. "I only found out about my innate mental powers recently." "Well, good, Taven said. "Though I'm not too happy you are keeping secrets like that. Especially something that sounds so shady. I never knew there was a colony of sapient spiders living beneath the city. They are not here legally, are they? And you're just hanging around them and learning mind magic from them like it's nothing. What else are you hiding from me? You're just mad I didn't invite you along for this shady adventure," Zorian said, deflecting her worries. "Yes, damn it," she said, swinging her fist at his shoulder. He flawlessly deflected her half-hearted punch to the side, causing her to stop and blink at him in surprise. His move wasn't really all that amazing, but he suddenly realized he never used to do that sort of thing before the time loop. "Oops. You know I'm right, though," she said, ignoring the incident in favor of crossing her arms in front of her chest and staring down at him. "It's crazy dangerous what you're doing, and you should have at least taken a bodyguard when going down there." "You?" Zorian guessed. "Who else do you know that is an amazing battle mage?" she asked rhetorically, straightening her pose pridefully. "Well, I've been hanging out with Zack Nevada lately, and he's pretty good at combat magic," Zorian told her. "The Nevada heir? Isn't he one of your classmates?" Taven asked dubiously. "Yes," Zorian confirmed. "A third-year student being able to compare with me? Please," Taven scoffed. "You're looking down way too much on me, Zorian. Looks like I'll have to challenge you to a proper fight soon, just to broaden your horizons and let you get some perspective on things." Zorian couldn't help it. He stopped himself from laughing out loud at her, but there was a wide smile stuck on his face that just wouldn't go away. "What?" she demanded. "What the hell is so amusing about what I said? You want to fight right now?" He couldn't help it and simply burst into laughter at her. Later on, Zorian reflected that Imaya was probably starting to think of him as some major weirdo. First it was that incident of him punching himself in the head earlier, and now there was a girl chasing him around the house and demanding that he takes it like a man and whatnot. Zorian wasn't sure how his friendship with Taven was going to fare in the future, considering that he could not possibly hide the full extent of his skills forever. But at least her current visit had brightened his day somewhat. Red Robe had chosen his targets well. Although situated on the border of Eldamar and relatively close to Cioria, Holakir was pretty difficult to access. It had rather unfriendly relations with Eldamar, not an unusual situation in regards to states bordering their country, and it was a mountainous country with poor transport infrastructure and plenty of isolated mountain villages. Reaching their destination was quite expensive, requiring lots of teleportation and other magic, and orienting themselves was a chore. The whole region was swarming with Holakirian soldiers searching for the culprits and trying to control the flow of news and people in and out of the place. Additionally, Holakir's cartographers had apparently not done a very good job, because some of the villages hit by the attacks weren't even marked in publicly available maps and records. Still, Zack and Zorian were resourceful people, and their simulacrums inherited their skills. Thus, it took them less than 2 days to reach the villages Benisek had told them about and investigate the situation. The results of the investigation were grim. Benisek had said the worst of the rumors mentioned hundreds of casualties. But it only took one glance at the first village they visited to realize this estimate was, if anything, severely understated. The village was the scene of a total bloodbath. Of the 300 or so inhabitants, most of them had been killed. Only a young couple that sneaked away from the village during the night and an old hunter that decided to sleep over in the wilderness had survived the slaughter. The attackers hadn't even bothered to loot the place. The objective appeared to have been simple, indiscriminate killing. The other villages they visited were pretty much the same. A sudden, overwhelming attack that aimed to kill as many as possible. Accounts of the attackers were hard to come by, since most people who got caught up in it died, but it was clear the attacker was a sizable armed group. A group that contained war trolls, various monsters, and scores of undead. A group that seemed capable of teleporting themselves all over the place, because they had hit over 10 villages in the span of a single night, before seemingly disappearing into thin air. Adding everything together, Zack and Zorian estimated the death toll reached easily into thousands. Hulakorian authorities had walled off the area from the rest of the country, fearing mass panic and unrest if the true scope of the slaughter became known, which was why the reaction to the attack was rather muted at the moment. Still, those kinds of measures were just stalling for time. Zorian would be surprised if they could keep it a secret for more than a week. At first, neither Zack nor Zorian could understand this move. What was Red Robe trying to accomplish by killing Hulakorian villages like that? Was this some sort of large-scale sacrifice? Zorian wouldn't call himself an expert on blood magic, but he didn't think so. The killing was too quick and disorganized, and the villages hit by the attacks weren't arranged into discernible pattern. In the end they went to Alanik for help. Alanik was one of the people they had decided to inform about the existence of the time loop and the invasion no matter what, since he was highly competent and already in huge danger from the invaders no matter what. Thus far he still wasn't convinced they were telling the truth about the whole time travel business, but the information they had brought him was pretty convincing on its own. After all, the little notebook that Zorian duplicated from his memory packets was written by Alanik himself, and listed all sorts of criminal groups and hideouts they had found over the restarts. Even if Alanik thought they were lying or delusional about being time travelers, he was still holding a book written in his own handwriting, mentioning things only he should know about and listing a variety of things whose truthfulness was easy to check. Alanik took one look at the information they had compiled about the attack on Hulakorian villages and dismissed the idea it was some kind of massive demon summoning or some other piece of blood magic. Blood magic-fueled summonings are disturbingly easy, but not this easy, Alanik said, shaking his head. The victims would have to be herded into a central location. Their life force would have to be carefully mixed and funneled into a massive spell formula circle. The preparations would not be small and would be easily noticed and stopped. Holaker's authorities would not miss such a thing, and you would have seen evidence of it even if they had. Then what is this about? Asked Zack, sounding frustrated. Why are they killing all these people? It's not simply bloodthirstiness, I'm sure of that. This was clearly done with the full cooperation of Quatachichel and his forces. There is no way he would have agreed to this unless there was some kind of clear benefit to this. Alanik looked at the papers in silence, shuffling them around while frowning deeply. This went on for a full minute, with Zack and Zorian quietly waiting to hear what he had to say. I almost want to say this is a soul-gathering operation, Alanik eventually told them. Except, gathering souls is not such a simple business, either. In order to gather the souls of thousands of people, the attackers would need thousands of soul containers. Even if they could afford to build that many, the sheer logistics of shuffling those soul containers around to the right place and the right time and casting the necessary spells to capture the soul before it moved on to the afterlife. Zack and Zorian's faces became uglier the longer Alanik continued to speak. Shit, Zack swore. What? Alanik said, frowning. He was frowning a lot at the moment, clearly upset by the information the two of them just brought him. They don't have to go through all that trouble because they have Sadamir's Well of Souls, Zorian explained to him. Well of Souls. Alanik slowly repeated. He glanced at the little book on the side of the table. Is that inside the notebook you gave me? It is, Zorian confirmed. You must not have reached that part. Alanik quickly flipped through it until he reached the relevant part. Zack and Zorian waited for him to finish, discussing things quietly amongst themselves. "Well," Alanik eventually said, snapping the book in his hands shut. "Not only am I now certain this was indeed a soul-gathering operation, I think I even know what they need all those souls for." "Yes. And so do we," Zack told him grimly. "It's pretty obvious at this point. Sadamir is making his Wraith bombs in advance," Zorian finished for them. Break. Despite recent developments, Zack and Zorian decided to attend the first day of classes at the academy. There were 3 reasons for that. The first one was that Zack and Zorian wanted to scout out the Esqua mansion to see what they were dealing with before they committed themselves to anything substantial. The second one was that they should get access to Koth soon, which will greatly expand their capabilities and was well worth waiting for. And the third one was that showing up to class today was probably their last chance to do such a thing for the rest of the month. After today, it was unlikely they would have time to mess around with schoolwork and attending classes. They might as well take this opportunity to reunite with their classmates for a moment, finish recovering, and mentally prepare themselves for the trials ahead. "You're late." Zorian looked at Akoya, dutifully standing in front of the door with a clipboard in her hands and taking note of incoming students. She stared at him coolly, tapping her foot impatiently against the ground. He simply smiled at her in response, causing her to suddenly lose her cool and look away uncomfortably. "Sorry," Zorian told her. "Things are a little hectic these days, at least for me." "Well, just don't let it happen in the future, okay?" she told him seriously, quickly recovering her confidence. "Sadly, I don't think that's possible." Zorian shook his head. "I'm probably going to be absent from classes a lot in the near future. It's not a good idea to miss the start of the school year like that," she told him with a small frown. "I disagree. The start of the school year is the best time to miss," Zorian told her. "It's all just repetition of things we've already learned in previous years and very easy study material. I'll make up for it in a flash, you'll see." "Just get inside already," she told him with a long-suffering sigh. Zorian gave her a thumbs up and did as he was told, humming happily as he entered the classroom and picked a seat for himself. Zack was already inside, Akoya not having paid too much attention to him. Zorian greeted a few of the classmates he remembered being slightly more friendly with before the time loop, turning some heads due to how uncharacteristically happy he seemed, before going towards the front of the classroom. He picked a familiar spot next to Brian and his fire drake, with Zack right behind him. Just like he expected, the small fire drake in Brian's lap immediately started hissing at him when he approached. Brian quickly enclosed the orange-red lizard with both hands and started whispering soothingly at his familiar. The drake calmed down a little but still kept both of his eyes on Zorian, alert and nervous. Zorian ignored the spectacle, simply plopping down on his seat and calmly watching the scene. He still didn't understand what exactly the fire drake found so upsetting about him in particular. He had once even peered into the fire drake's mind to find the answer, but that didn't help. The fire drake was not actually a sapient being. He was a creature of instinct, and something deep inside of him told him that Zorian was uniquely dangerous out of all people gathered in the classroom. The fire drake did not understand why, but it trusted its instincts. Did the drake sense Zorian's mental powers, despite not being psychic himself? Did Zorian have some ability he had no idea about? It was a mystery. From what Brian had told him, he wasn't unique in this regard. Fire drakes could be very strange, temperamental creatures, and he wasn't the first person that his familiar had picked out for some reason. Eventually, the influence of the mage they were bonded with tended to temper these kinds of aggressive urges, and mature fire drake familiars were apparently far more placid and reliable in dealing with strangers. "Sorry about that," Brian said. "He's still a little uneasy around strangers." "Don't worry about it," Zorian said, waving the apology away. "Congratulations on getting your own familiar, I guess. Must be a milestone for you." "Yeah," Brian said happily, patting the drake like some kind of scaly cat. The drake reacted to that sort of like a cat, too. "It's great." He spent some time talking to Brian and waiting for the class to start. Though it was premature to worry about that now, he couldn't help but wonder how to deal with school life in the future. His classmates were nice and all. Some of them he'd be happy to befriend if possible. But he was so much more capable than the magic-wise that it wasn't even funny. Plus, the classes themselves are bound to be mind-numbingly boring. Could he really pretend to be just a normal student for 2 years straight? Was it actually possible for someone like him, a guy with Archmage-level skills and a decade of additional memories and experience under his belt, to befriend one of these people? Perhaps TimeLoop Tivan was right, and his attempt to connect to his former friends and classmates was ultimately kind of hollow and patronizing. Thankfully, his somewhat depressing thoughts were soon interrupted by Elsa's arrival to class. She did her practice speech at the beginning of the class and then started the lesson. Zorian was already preparing himself for a boring but relaxing class the likes of which he had heard dozens of times inside the time loop when the classroom door suddenly burst open, and a teenage boy his own age swaggered inside. He was tall, with messy blonde hair and rumpled clothes that looked like they had seen better days. The door had been opened so forcefully that Zorian suspected the boy had kicked it open with his foot instead of using the handle. It rebounded against the wall with a loud bang and promptly closed itself behind him. As he marched forward towards the front of the class, the boy swept the whole class with his gaze. For a moment, Zorian met his eyes and found himself staring at vividly orange eyes, their slitted pupils burning with barely contained anger and aggression. Versboranova had arrived to class. Tope continued,